The police stormed toward my cabin for the fifth time in 3 months, weapons ready as if responding to a violent crime, all because I dared paint my own property blue. The HOA tyrant, Diana Peterson, stood watching with a triumphant smirk that screamed she believed she'd finally crushed me. She had no idea what was coming. Her pristine reputation, iron grip on the community, and secret deal were about to explode in the most satisfying courtroom takedown this county had ever witnessed. Bullies with badges and bylaws expect submission, not calculated resistance. But I wasn't just fighting back. I was about to win. Hey, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Have you ever dealt with neighborhood tyrants who thought rules were weapons? Trust me, this story will give you the blueprint for sweet legal revenge. After the pandemic, I needed a change. Working as a freelance programmer meant I could live anywhere with decent internet, and I'd always dreamed of a place by the water. When I found the listing for the small wooden cabin on Lake Pinehurst in Wisconsin, something just clicked. The real estate agent mentioned it was built in the 1970s, one of the original structures around the lake with the perfect view of the water. What she didn't mention was that I would be inheriting a neighborhood war along with the property deed. The first week at the cabin was pure bliss. I set up my home office by the large window overlooking the lake, enjoying the serenity of nature while coding. I decided to repaint the faded front porch, a deep cobalt blue, drastically different from the beige and brown tones of the other cabins around the lake. It felt good to add some personality to the place, to make it mine. I was up on a ladder, paintbrush in hand, whistling to myself when a shadow fell across the porch. "Excuse me, but that color hasn't been approved by the architectural committee," came a sharp voice from below. I turned to see a tall woman with immaculately styled silver hair and a collared shirt so stiffly pressed it could probably stand up on its own. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, and her lips were pursed in disapproval. "I'm Diana Peterson, president of the Pinehurst Lake Homeowners Association. All exterior modifications must be submitted for approval before implementation." I carefully climbed down the ladder, extended my hand, and introduced myself. "Mason Turner. Nice to meet you, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. My cabin isn't part of the HOA. I pointed to the property map I'd received with my closing documents, which clearly showed the boundary line of the association, stopping well before my property. The agent and my lawyer both confirmed this during the purchase. Diana's face tightened, her smile becoming even more forced. "While you may technically be outside the official boundary, we have community standards that everyone around the lake adheres to. The blue is garish. It affects property values and the aesthetic harmony we've worked hard to maintain." She thrust a thick binder at me, which I reluctantly accepted. "Here's our rulebook. 57 pages of guidelines that maintain our property values. I strongly suggest you familiarize yourself with it and repaint to an approved color." I flipped through the binder, noting absurd details like approved mailbox designs and the exact height grass could reach before requiring mowing. "With all due respect, Miss Peterson, since I'm not a member, these rules don't apply to me." I checked very carefully before buying. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "We'll see about that, Mr. Turner." She turned on her heel and walked away, already pulling out her phone. Later that afternoon, I met my neighbor Sarah Williams, a young graphic designer who had moved in 6 months earlier. "I see you've met the Dragon Lady," she said with a sympathetic smile. "Diana runs the HOA like it's her personal kingdom. I get fined for the stupidest things. Leaving my recycling bin out an hour too long, wind chimes that are too audible, you name it. But my cabin isn't even part of the HOA," I explained. Sarah's expression grew serious. "That won't stop her. The 5 cabins outside the HOA boundary are like a personal affront to her. She's been trying to get all of you to join her sale for years. The last holdout before you moved in. She made his life hell until he finally gave up and sold to an HOA member." The next morning, I found a violation notice slipped under my door, citing unauthorized color selection and demanding I repaint within 7 days or face escalating fines. I pinned it to my bulletin board with a laugh, assuming it was just an intimidation tactic. I was wrong. 3 more notices followed throughout the week, each for increasingly ridiculous violations: improper placement of outdoor furniture, unapproved landscaping. I had planted 3 native wildflowers, an excessive vehicle presence, my single car parked in my own driveway. I was still laughing it off when on day 5, Sheriff Mike Donovan's cruiser pulled up outside. I watched from the window as Diana stood at the edge of my property, gesturing animatedly toward my blue porch. The sheriff, a solidly built man with a weathered face and tired eyes, trudged up to my door and knocked reluctantly. "Mr. Turner, I've received a complaint about unauthorized construction," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. I invited him in, showed him my property documents, and explained the situation. To his credit, he reviewed everything thoroughly and nodded. "Looks like you're right. You're outside the HOA boundary. I'll let Miss Peterson know there's nothing I can do here." As he left, I watched through the window as he spoke to Diana. Her face wrined and she gestured wildly, but the sheriff just shook his head and drove away. Later that evening, as I was grilling dinner on my porch, an elderly man with a cane made his way up my driveway. He introduced himself as Herb Thompson, a 76-year-old retired county judge who'd lived on the lake since before the HOA existed. "Thought you should know what you're really up against, son," he said, easing himself into a chair I offered. "Diana's not just on a power trip. There's a developer looking to buy up the whole lakefront, turn it into some fancy resort. HOA members who vote to sell get a premium, and the board gets a special commission, but they need all the properties, including yours. That blue porch of yours, it's not just an eyesore to her, it's a financial obstacle." As Herb left, he paused at the edge of the porch. "Word of advice, document everything. Diana doesn't play fair, and this is just her opening move." What I didn't know then was that this was just the greeting. Diana had a full-scale attack plan, and her hammer of justice was about to come down on my head in ways I couldn't have imagined. The notices kept coming, stuffed under my door or taped to my mailbox daily. I started a special file for them, amused at first by the absurdity. An unsanctioned bird feeder installation, excessive lake viewing, improper trash receptacle color. Each one demanded compliance with HOA rules and threatened escalating fines that I had no legal obligation to pay. But when cease and desist letter arrived from Thomas Reed, the HOA's attorney, the amusement faded. The letter warned of legal action for persistent violations of community aesthetic standards and demanded I repaint my porch immediately. I spent the next week researching the history of disputes around the lake. The county records office was a goldmine of information, confirming that the 5 cabins on the North Shore, including mine, had always existed outside the HOA's jurisdiction. The HOA had been established in 1995, decades after our cabins were built. I also discovered that the association had been trying to purchase these properties for years, using various pressure tactics on the owners. Records also revealed a pattern of escalating harassment whenever non-HOA owners refused to sell. One elderly couple had endured 6 months of daily violations before finally giving in and selling their cabin for $15,000 below market value. Another owner found his boat mysteriously untethered during a storm after refusing an HOA buyout offer. The damage had cost him nearly $8,000 to repair. Coincidentally, almost the exact difference between the HOA's lowball offer and the property's actual value. These weren't isolated incidents. They were calculated strategies. I dug deeper into Deanna's background, discovering that before becoming HOA president, she had worked for 22 years at a property management company until being dismissed following multiple complaints about her management style. Former colleagues described her as obsessively controlling and vindictive toward anyone who challenged her authority. The similarities to her, I carefully documented everything, creating backup copies stored in both physical and cloud locations. These people clearly wouldn't hesitate to lose evidence that worked against them. When I mentioned the legal threats to Sarah during one of our evening chats on the dock, she nervously glanced around before speaking. "They've been getting worse lately," she whispered. Diana called an emergency meeting last week about community threats. She specifically named you as a disruptive element. She's pressuring everyone to avoid contact with you. I could get fined just for talking to you right now. The next day, I found my car photographed from multiple angles by a woman I recognized from the HOA board. When I asked what she was doing, she scurried away without answering. That afternoon, I received a notice claiming my vehicle was improperly parked on an HOA access road, even though it was clearly on my own property. My father, a retired attorney, for advice. Document everything, he said, echoing Herb's words. Take photographs. Record conversations if legal in your state. Save every notice. They're building a harassment case against you, so you need to build one against them. During a moment of quiet reflection that evening, watching the sunset on the lake from my blue porch, I found myself remembering fishing trips with my father on this very lake when I was a child. We'd stayed in a small rental cabin not far from where mine now stood. I remember Dad pointing out a family of loons, teaching me to skip stones across the water's surface and telling stories by the campfire. The memory strengthened my resolve. This place meant something to me beyond just a convenient remote work location. My peaceful reminiscence was interrupted by Sheriff Donovan's cruiser pulling up again. This time Diana stood nearby with two other HOA members, all filming with their phones as the sheriff approached my door. Noise complaint, Donovan said with an embarrassed sigh, supposedly disrupting the peace with power tools. The only power tool I had used that day was an electric screwdriver to fix a loose chair leg for 15 minutes. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This is getting ridiculous, Sheriff. I said, no longer amused. She's using you to harass me. Look, I know, he replied quietly. I have to respond to calls, but between us this is getting out of hand. Just be careful around her. Diana has a lot of influence in this town. He glanced over his shoulder at the HOA president, who was watching our interaction like a hawk. She's got half the county council in her pocket because of donations. After he left, I invited him to look at the property boundary documents and the cease and desist letter. He studied them carefully, rubbing his chin. These boundaries are clear, he acknowledged. You're definitely outside the HOA jurisdiction, but that won't stop them from making your life difficult. As days turned into weeks, the psychological warfare intensified. Someone reported me to the county for illegal waste disposal when I was composting completely legally in a corner of my yard. My internet mysteriously went out for 3 days, despite no other outages in the area. Anonymous 1-star reviews appeared for my freelance programming business online, all posted from local. Then came the letter that pushed me from irritated to angry. A formal threat of litigation from Thomas Reed, accusing me of multiple persistent violations of community standards and demanding compliance or court action. At the bottom of the letter was a note about Reed being admitted to the Wisconsin bar in 2005. A quick social media search revealed that Thomas Reed was Diana Peterson's first cousin, an ethical conflict he should have disclosed. As I stared at the threatening letter, I couldn't help but remember my father's words about standing up to bullies. They only stop when you hit back 10 times harder. The question was, how do you hit back at someone who's using the entire system against you? The answer came from a place I never expected. I spent the next several days diving deep into Wisconsin state laws regarding homeowners associations. The county records office became my second home as I pored through dusty binders and digital archives of local ordinances. During one particularly tedious search through property records, I noticed a faded notation on an old map. Historic overlay zone marked in faint pencil across the entire lake area. I wasn't sure what it meant, but I made a note to look into it later. The archives were a labyrinth of information. Some organized, much of it not. I found myself crawling through bankers' boxes filled with documents from the 1970s, many yellowed with age and smelling of mildew. My programmer's brain, accustomed to searchable databases and logical structures, rebelled against the physical chaos. But there was something deeply satisfying about the tangible connection to history. These papers had been touched by the very people who established the rules governing our community decades ago. Their fingerprints, both literal and figurative, remained on decisions affecting us today. I discovered meeting minutes from the original Lake Association formed in 1972, long before the official HOA. The contrast was striking. The original association focused on community cleanups, shared dock maintenance, and fish stocking programs. There was no mention of aesthetic controls or property restrictions. The transformation from community collaboration to authoritarian control had happened gradually, almost imperceptibly over decades. I documented the evolution meticulously, creating a timeline that showed how power had concentrated in fewer hands over time. particularly after Diana took over 15 years ago. As I was leaving, looking blurry-eyed after hours of research, an older woman at the records desk called me over. "Finding everything you need?" she asked with a knowing look. When I explained my situation, she lowered her voice. "You might want to look up the Wisconsin Area Freedom Act of 1983. Not many people know about it, but it specifically prohibits HOAs from enforcing their regulations on non-member properties. They can't even find you, let alone force compliance." She pulled up the statute on her computer and printed it for me. The language was crystal clear. No homeowners association may impose or enforce architectural, aesthetic, or usage restrictions upon properties not legally incorporated within its registered boundaries at the time of enforcement. It even specified penalties for associations that attempted to do so. "My husband and I fought a similar battle at Cedar Lake back in the 90s. She confided. "These associations get drunk on power sometimes. Forget they're supposed to serve the community, not rule it. The law is on your side. But be careful. People like your Diana Peterson don't take kindly to having their authority questioned." She slipped me her card with her personal number. "If you need anything else, don't hesitate to call. Some battles are worth fighting." Armed with this new information and the official boundary maps confirming my property's independence, I felt a surge of confidence. I decided to reach out to the other 4 cabin owners outside the HOA boundary. We met discreetly at Herb's place, the furthest from Diana's watchful eyes. Among them was a retired teacher, a doctor and his wife, and a young couple who had inherited their cabin from Grandpup. "She's been at us for years," the teacher explained. "I've been threatened with fines for having a bird bath." A bird bath said it was an unapproved water feature. "We're constantly photographed." The young wife added, "It feels like living in a surveillance state. We were thinking of selling just to escape the harassment." I shared the Wisconsin Area Freedom Act with them, and we formed a small alliance, agreeing to support each other against HOA overreach. We created a group chat to share incidents and advice, careful to keep it private. Diana must have had spies everywhere, because within 24 hours of our meeting, the harassment escalated dramatically. A smear campaign appeared on the neighborhood social media group with posts claiming I was running an illegal business from my cabin and destroying property values with tacky renovations. Several HOA members began filing daily complaints about everything from my vehicle to the wind chimes Sarah had given me as a housewarming gift. The next afternoon, I was planting native wildflowers in my small garden when Sheriff Donovan's cruiser pulled up again. The 3rd police visit in less than a month. Diana and 2 HOA board members stood across the street filming and pointing. "Hello, illegal dumping complaint," Donovan said, looking increasingly uncomfortable with his role in this charade. "Someone reported you were disposing of toxic materials in your garden." I showed him the organic soil and native seedlings I was planting. "Does this look toxic to you, Sheriff?" Donovan sighed heavily. "This is getting out of hand, Mason. I've got real police work to do." He glanced at Diana, who was watching our interaction intently. "Between us, I'm documenting all these false reports. There could be consequences for filing them." After he left, I invited him inside to show him the Freedom Act I discovered and the official boundary maps. "This is interesting," he said, studying the documents. "I wasn't aware of this law. You might have a solid case here if they continue." That evening, Herb stopped by with more insights about Diana's past. She was fired from her management position at Wilson Manufacturing about 8 years ago. He revealed something about creating a hostile work environment and abusing authority. The HOA presidency is her redemption story. At least in her mind. It's the only place she feels valued anymore. Meanwhile, Sarah had been keeping her distance, clearly afraid of HOA retaliation. But she texted to warn me that Diana had called another emergency meeting focused entirely on the North Shore problem code for the non-HOA properties. Armed with the Freedom Act and boundary documentation, I drafted a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA, citing the specific law prohibiting their harassment and demanding they stop all enforcement actions against my property. I sent copies to each board member, the HOA attorney, and the county property office detailing every incident of harassment with dates, photos, and witness account. The response came faster than I expected. Thomas Reed sent a dismissive reply claiming the Freedom Act was obsolete and superseded by more recent community development statutes. He ended with a thinly veiled threat. The association recommends you consult with a real attorney before making further legally unsound assertions. I studied his letter carefully, noting the lack of specific statute citations and the condescending tone. As a programmer, I'm trained to spot logical inconsistencies. And Reed's letter was full of them. He wouldn't be so defensive if I hadn't hit a nerve. There was something they weren't telling me, something in those HOA documents that they didn't want scrutinized too closely. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew when someone was bluffing. Reed's response was too confident for such a weak argument. What were they hiding? And why were they so determined to drive me away? The answer lay buried in some document hidden deep in the county records, and it would completely change the game. The county archives revealed more than I expected. Hidden among property records and development permits was a draft proposal for Pinehurst Lake Luxury Resort and Spa from Meridian Development Group, one of the largest resort developers in the Midwest. The proposal, dated just 3 months before my arrival, detailed plans to purchase the entire lakefront, demolish the existing cabins, and build a 200-room resort with a golf course, 3 restaurants, and boat rentals. Most tellingly, it included a special community transition bonus for HOA board members who facilitated the acquisition of all properties. Now Deanna's obsession made perfect sense. My refusal to sell or join the HOA wasn't just annoying her control issues, it was threatening a massive payday. According to the document, each board member would receive a $25,000 consulting fee once all properties were secured, with the HOA president getting double that amount. They needed every single property around the lake for the development to proceed. The proposal included detailed renderings of the planned resort, a sprawling complex that would forever destroy the natural beauty and peaceful character of the lake. Ancient pines would be replaced with manicured lawns. The rustic shoreline transformed into concrete retaining walls and artificial beaches. They even planned to drain and reshape parts of the lake to accommodate a water feature for the golf course. The environmental impact assessment was suspiciously thin, glossing over concerns about wildlife habitats and water quality with vague promises of mitigation strategies. More disturbing were the meeting minutes. I discovered from a closed-door HOA board session 3 months earlier. Deanna had explicitly instructed board members to keep the development plan secret from regular HOA members, claiming it would unnecessarily complicate negotiations if word got out before signatures were secured. They had effectively conspired to sell out their own neighbors without consent or consultation. The minutes even included a cynical discussion about using HOA reserve funds, money collected from members for community maintenance, to hire a property acquisition specialist to pressure holdout owners. I photocopied everything, taking care to replace documents exactly as I'd found them. These weren't just petty neighborhood politics anymore. This was deliberate fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. I felt a growing anger at how casually they had planned to destroy a community that had existed for generations, all for a quick profit and a boost to Diana's ego. I shared this bombshell with my fellow non-HOA neighbors. They're not just being petty tyrants, I explained, showing them the development plans. They're actively trying to force us out for their own financial gain. That explains why they offered to buy my place for 20% below market value last month. The retired teacher said, when I refused, the harassment doubled. We agreed to stand firm together, each sending our own cease and desist letters citing the Freedom Act. Within days, we all received identical final notices from the HOA demanding compliance with community standards or facing significant legal consequences. The threatening language was almost comical given what we now knew about the law and their true motivation. I sent a pointed reply, refusing to acknowledge any HOA authority over my property and highlighting my awareness of the resort development plan. The response was immediate and direct. Diana herself, accompanied by Thomas Reed, marching up my driveway the next morning. "You're making a serious mistake, Turner," Diana said, her voice cold as she stood on my porch. "This community has standards, and one way or another you will comply." I remained calm, recording the conversation on my phone in plain view. I'm not part of your HOA, Miss Peterson. The Wisconsin Area Freedom Act is very clear about your lack of authority over my property. Thomas stepped forward, attempting to look intimidating despite being several inches shorter than me. That outdated statute won't protect you. We have the resources for extended litigation. Do you? Legal fees add up quickly, and freelance programmers aren't exactly known for their deep pockets. Is that a threat, counselor? I asked, looking directly at my phone's camera. Because it sounds like you're threatening me with frivolous litigation to force compliance with rules that legally don't apply to me. The Bar Association might have opinions about that kind of behavior. Diana's composure cracked slightly. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I've been running this community for 15 years. People who cross me don't tend to stay around long. That sounds remarkably like another threat, I replied calmly. Sheriff Donovan might be interested in hearing that statement. Diana's face flushed crimson. She jabbed a finger toward my chest. You think you're so clever with your blue porch and your legal technicalities. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. As they turned to leave, a neighbor across the street who had witnessed the confrontation called out, "Everything okay over there, Mason? Should I call someone?" Diana glared at her, but the neighbor stood her ground, phone visibly in hand. Less than an hour later, Sheriff Donovan's cruiser pulled up. The fourth police visit in 6 weeks. This time, however, it was different. Got a call about a disturbance, he explained. Someone reported you were threatening HOA representatives. I recorded the entire interaction, I said, playing the video for him right there on my porch. The recording clearly showed Diana and Thomas making the threats, not me. Donovan watched the full video, his expression darkening as he heard Diana's thinly veiled threats. This is crossing a line, he said quietly. I've been patient because Diana has connections with the county commissioners, but this is harassment, plain and simple. He turned to Diana, who was watching from the street. Mrs. Peterson, I need to speak with you about filing false police reports. Their confrontation was brief but intense. I couldn't hear everything from my porch, but Diana's body language told the story. First defensive, then incredulous, and finally furious as Donovan firmly stood his ground. It was clearly the first time a local official had dared to challenge her authority. I realized Donovan was taking a professional risk by confronting someone with political connections. His willingness to uphold the law, despite personal consequences, raised him significantly, in my estimation. That evening, as the sun set over the lake, I found myself struggling with doubt for the first time. The constant stress was affecting my work, my sleep, and my peace of mind. In a moment of weakness, I seriously considered selling the cabin and moving somewhere without the drama. I called my father expressing my frustration. Remember when I used to take you fishing at that lake? He asked. You were maybe 8 years old and you caught that huge bass all by yourself. You refused to give up even though it was getting dark and everyone else had quit for the day. I remember I said, smiling at the memory. Some things are worth fighting for, son. That place meant something to us then, and it means something to you now. Don't let bullies take that away. They're getting desperate, which means you're winning. After hanging up, I noticed a text from an unknown number. Diana falsified the HOA boundary documents after registration. I have proof. Meet me at the county clerk's office tomorrow, 11 a.m. It was signed simply, a concerned citizen. The pieces were starting to come together. Diana wasn't just a bully. She was a fraud, and now I had evidence. But before I could act on this new information, the situation escalated dramatically. One stormy night, the storm hit Lake Pinehurst with unexpected fury, dropping 5 inches of rain in just a few hours and bringing down trees all around the lake. I awoke to the sound of water dripping steadily into my bedroom. The old cabin roof had finally given up its long battle against the elements. Dawn revealed significant damage. A large section of shingles had been torn away, exposing the wooden structure beneath to the elements. I immediately tarped the roof as a temporary measure and called several local contractors. The earliest any could come out was 3 days later, so I decided to tackle the most urgent repairs myself. I bought supplies from the hardware store in town and began replacing the damaged section, working carefully to match the original design while improving the waterproofing. My experience with basic construction came from teenage summers working with my uncle's roofing company in Milwaukee. Hot, grueling work that paid for my first computer. Now those skills were proving unexpectedly valuable as I navigated the steep pitch of my cabin roof, securing new shingles while the wind continued to gust unpredictably. The work was physically demanding, but strangely therapeutic. There was something deeply satisfying about protecting my home with my own hands, about the simple, tangible progress of each newly secured section. Several neighbors stopped by to offer help. Not HOA members, but regular folks concerned about a neighbor in trouble. An elderly man from down the road brought me a thermos of coffee. A family whose downed tree I'd helped clear the previous day arrived with sandwiches and extra tarps. This was the community Diana couldn't control. People helping people without regulations or committees, acting on basic human decency rather than rulebook. By midday, word had spread through the HOA grapevine. Diana called an emergency board meeting and, within hours, issued a storm recovery aesthetic ordinance mandating specific materials and colors for all visible repairs. Most concerning, she somehow convinced the County Emergency Management Office that the HOA had temporary authority over all lakefront properties to ensure structural integrity and community safety during the disaster recovery period. The documents authorizing this extraordinary power were vague, citing obscure municipal codes and using deliberately confusing language about unified recovery management and aesthetic integrity during rebuilding. Diana had expertly exploited the chaos of the emergency situation, presenting herself to county officials as the organized, responsible authority figure amid crisis. The overworked emergency management director dealing with damage throughout the county had apparently been all too happy to delegate responsibility to someone eager to take it. This was a new level of overreach. Using the storm as pretext to seize control, I continued my repairs using proper materials that happened to not match their arbitrary specifications. By the next morning, several other cabin owners were doing the same, creating a visible divide between HOA-compliant beige repairs and the more individualized approaches from the non-HOA property. 3 days into the repairs, I received a handheld court summons. The HOA was suing me for willful violation of emergency safety protocols and seeking an injunction to stop my repairs immediately. Thomas had filed paperwork with the county court claiming the HOA had jurisdiction over all lakefront properties during the emergency period, including an altered map showing my cabin within HOA boundary. "This is crossing a line," I told Sarah, who had risked HOA penalties to bring me soup during the repairs. "They're actually falsifying legal documents now." "You're not the only one they're targeting," she replied, "but some of us are starting to ask questions." Patricia Anderson, the HOA treasurer, seemed really uncomfortable at the emergency meeting. She kept asking to see the original boundary documentation, and Deanna shut her down hard. That evening, my phone rang with an unknown number. "Mr. Turner, this is Patricia Anderson from the HOA board." Her voice was hushed, as if afraid of being overheard. "I've been the treasurer for 3 years, but what's happening now isn't right. I was there when Diana and Thomas altered the boundary maps to include your properties. They doctored the documents right before submitting them to the court for the emergency ordinance. Would you be willing to testify to that?" I asked, hardly believing my luck. "Yes, this has gone too far. Diana is risking the entire association's legal standing for her resort commission. Several board members are having second thoughts, but they're afraid to speak up." Patricia explained that Diana had become increasingly erratic as opposition mounted. During an executive session closed to regular members, she had ranted about taking control once and for all and making examples of troublemakers. "She's not even pretending this is about property values anymore," Patricia whispered. "It's about winning at any cost. I'm worried about what she might do next." The next morning, Sheriff Donovan arrived at my cabin for the 5th time, but this visit was different. He carried an official court order requiring me to cease all repair activities immediately based on the falsified jurisdiction claims. Diana stood nearby, arms crossed and a triumphant smile on her face. "I told you that you couldn't win," she called out as Donovan approached my door. Instead of arguing, I smiled calmly. "Thanks for coming out, Sheriff. I actually needed another witness." I reached behind my door and pulled out a thick folder of documents. I have evidence of document fraud, harassment, and abuse of emergency powers, and I'd like to file formal charges. The confidence drained from Diana's face as I handed Donovan the folder containing the original boundary documents, Patricia's sworn statement about the falsification, and dozens of harassment incidents meticulously documented with dates, photographs, and witness accounts. "I'll need to review these," Donovan said, leafing through the papers with increasing concern. "If these allegations are accurate, this is very serious, Mr. Turner." "They're accurate," I assured him. "And there's more. The entire harassment campaign has been orchestrated to force out non-HOA property owners so the board can sell to a resort developer for personal profit." I showed him the development proposal with the board commission structure clearly highlighted. Within 24 hours, I filed a countersuit against the HOA Diana and Thomas for harassment, document fraud, and abuse of process. Many HOA members, now aware of the board's self-serving actions and the illegal boundary alterations, called for an emergency meeting to investigate their leadership. Sarah organized a petition signed by over half the members demanding transparency and accountability. Deanna received her court summons the following day. The transformation on her face from arrogance to panic was so rapid that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost, but not quite. The upcoming court date wouldn't just determine the fate of my cabin repairs, it would expose a conspiracy larger than anyone had imagined. The county courthouse was packed the morning of the hearing. Nearly every HOA member attended along with all 5 non-HOA property owners, curious locals, and even a reporter from the regional newspaper who had caught wind of the development controversy. I arrived early, dressed in my best suit, carrying a meticulously organized portfolio of evidence. The HOA had arrived in force with Diana flanked by Thomas and 2 additional attorneys from his firm. When the bailiff called our case, Diana's legal team strode confidently to their table. Thomas couldn't resist a smirk in my direction when he realized I was representing myself. "A programmer playing lawyer," he whispered loudly enough for the front row to hear. "This should be entertaining." Judge Eleanor Watkins, a nonsense veteran of the bench with 30 years' experience, looked over her glasses at both parties. "I understand we have multiple issues before the court today. First, an emergency injunction regarding property repairs, and second, a countersuit alleging harassment and document fraud. Let's begin with the HOA's motion." Thomas rose smoothly, adjusting his expensive tie. "Your Honor, the Pinrest Lake Homeowners Association has implemented emergency repair standards to ensure structural integrity and community safety following the recent storm damage. Mr. Turner has willfully violated these standards, potentially compromising the structural integrity of his property and, by extension, neighboring properties. And your authority to impose these standards on Mr. Turner's property?" the judge asked. Thomas presented a map showing my cabin within the HOA boundaries. "As you can see, Your Honor, his property falls within our jurisdiction." "Your Honor," I said, standing, "I'd like to present the original HOA boundary documents filed with the county in 1995, which clearly show my property outside HOA jurisdiction." I presented certified copies from the county records office. "I'd also like to present the Wisconsin Area Freedom Act, which explicitly prohibits HOAs from imposing regulations on properties outside their boundaries." The judge examined both documents carefully, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Red, how do you explain the discrepancy between these 2 maps?" Thomas cleared his throat. "The more recent map reflects updated boundaries based on community development and integration patterns. Mr. Turner's property has long been considered part of the functional community. That's not how HOA boundaries work." Counselor Judge Watkins replied dryly. "They're legal entities with fixed borders unless formally amended with consent of all affected parties." I continued methodically presenting evidence of the harassment campaign, the dozens of invalid violation notices, the false police reports, sworn statements from neighbors who witnessed Diana photographing my property, and Sheriff Donovan's testimony about the repeated unfounded complaints. Furthermore, I added, I have evidence suggesting a financial motive behind these actions. I presented the resort development proposal with the board compensation structure highlighted. The HOA board stands to gain significantly if all properties around the lake are brought under their control for a planned resort development. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Several HOA members looked at Diana with dawning realization and anger. Thomas quickly stood. "Your Honor, these accusations are baseless and irrelevant to the matter at hand. What is relevant is this document. He dramatically produced a paper with what appeared to be my signature. This shows Mr. Turner explicitly agreed to abide by HOA regulations when purchasing his property regardless of technical boundary issues. The courtroom buzzed as Thomas handed the document to the bailiff. I accepted it calmly, studied it for a moment, then smiled. Your Honor, I anticipated this tactic. This signature is a forgery. I presented a folder containing a forensic handwriting analysis I had commissioned preemptively. I also have samples of my actual signature from multiple official documents for comparison. I then called Patricia Anderson to the stand. As the HOA treasurer, her testimony about witnessing Diana and Thomas altering the boundary documents before submission to the court was devastating. They literally used Photoshop to move the boundary line. She testified. Diana said it was just a technical correction to reflect reality, but I knew it was wrong. Judge Watkins turned to Thomas with an expression that could freeze lava. Counselor Reed, I sincerely hope you didn't learn this behavior in law school. Herb Thompson testified next about the history of the lake community before the HOA's formation, confirming that the 5 North Shore cabins had always operated independently. Sarah and other HOA members testified about Diana's increasingly controlling behavior and the pressure campaign against anyone who questioned her authority. The pivotal moment came when Diana herself took the stand under my questioning. After 20 minutes of evasive answers about the boundary alterations, she finally snapped under pressure. The HOA is the only place I felt valued since I was fired, she blurted out, her composure cracking. I built it into something meaningful, something powerful, and I'm not going to let 5 stubborn holdouts ruin everything I've worked for. Even if that means breaking the law, I asked quietly. Before she could answer, Judge Watkins intervened. I've heard enough. This court finds in favor of Mr. Turner. The emergency injunction is dissolved, and the HOA is permanently enjoined from attempting to enforce regulations on properties outside its legal boundaries. She turned a severe gaze to Thomas. As for the allegations of document fraud, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation. Mr. Reed, I suggest you also prepare for a conversation with the Bar Association's Ethics Committee. Diana and Thomas left the courtroom in disarray, their carefully constructed power structure crumbling around them. Many HOA members approached me afterward, apologizing for not questioning their leadership sooner and expressing shock at the resort development plans that would have displaced them all. I had won the case. But that was only half the story. While reviewing the other documents obtained during discovery, I discovered a crucial detail that even the HOA wasn't aware of. A detail that would not only protect my cabin forever, but completely shift the balance of power around Lake Pinterest. The old notation I had spotted on that faded map, Historic Overlay Zone, turned out to be far more significant than anyone realized. After the trial, I devoted myself to researching what it meant, digging through archives with renewed determination. What I discovered was extraordinary. The entire Lake Pinterest area had been designated a Wisconsin Historic Preservation District in 1968 due to its unique ecological features and historic summer cabins. This designation placed strict limitations on development, prohibiting large-scale commercial projects and restricting the power of any homeowners association to make sweeping changes without State Preservation Board approval. The designation had never been revoked. It had simply been forgotten over the decades as paperwork was digitized and filed away. I brought this documentation to Judge Watkins and the County Planning Office. The impact was immediate and far-reaching. The Meridian Development Group's resort plans were blocked entirely as they violated multiple preservation requirements. The HOA's authority was permanently restricted to aesthetic issues that complied with historical preservation guidelines, preventing the kind of overreach that had characterized Diana's reign. The fallout for Diana was severe. A vote of no confidence from HOA members forced her immediate resignation as president. Thomas faced an ethics investigation from the Wisconsin Bar Association for his role in falsifying legal documents with the likely outcome of suspension or disbarment. The HOA was ordered to pay damages to me and the other non-HOA cabin owners for the harassment campaign, and the county launched an investigation into the circumstances surrounding the emergency powers granted during the storm. Diana was forced to sell her beloved lakefront cabin to cover legal expenses and move to an old mobile home park outside town. In a twist of irony, she occasionally encountered Sarah, who had been elected as the new HOA president on a platform of transparency, cooperation, and respect for property rights. The HOA itself underwent a complete reformation under Sarah's leadership. A new set of bylaws was drafted emphasizing community cooperation rather than control. A surprising development was the formation of the Lake Penrest Preservation Alliance, which included both HOA and non-HOA residents, working together to maintain the lake's natural beauty and historical character. With the legal battles behind me, I could finally focus on properly repairing and enjoying my cabin. I finished the roof repairs according to historical preservation guidelines, which actually matched the original 1970s design I had planned. Anyway, my blue porch remained, though I added some natural wood accents that complemented both my taste and the historical character of the area. As summer arrived, I hosted a lakeside barbecue, inviting all neighbors including those who had previously supported Deanna. It was a gesture of reconciliation and a new beginning for the community. Sheriff Donovan stopped by, no longer on official business, and offered a sincere apology for his role in the harassment. I should have investigated those complaints more thoroughly from the start, he admitted. Sometimes doing the right thing means questioning authority even when it's uncomfortable. Inspired by my experience, I began writing a comprehensive homeowners' rights handbook detailing how individuals could protect themselves from HOA overreach. I decided to distribute it free to residents and post it online as a community resource, hoping to help others facing similar situations. One evening, as I sat on my blue porch watching the sunset over the lake, I spotted Diana driving slowly past. Her formerly imperious demeanor was gone, replaced by the defeated posture of someone who had lost everything that mattered to her. Rather than gloating, I raised my hand in a small wave and later sent her a copy of my handbook with a simple note. Everyone deserves to understand their rights. The handbook began to attract attention beyond our lake, with homeowners from across the state contacting me for advice on dealing with their own HOA issues. I found myself considering following in my father's footsteps and studying law, channeling my experience into helping others stand up against institutional bullying. Lake Penrest became an example of how a community could govern itself without requiring authoritarian control. The preservation district status ensured it would remain the beautiful natural retreat that had first attracted people decades ago, rather than becoming yet another overcrowded resort destination. In the end, I realized that my battle had never really been about a blue porch or even property rights. It had been about standing up to bullies and protecting something meaningful. My father had taught me to fight for what matters. And Lake Penrest, with its serene waters and simple cabins, mattered deeply to me and many others. Sometimes to build a true community, you have to be willing to fight for it. Even if that means facing off with the police 5 times and 1 Diana.